Today in this YouTube video, I'm going to be talking about some of the books that I've read on my spiritual journey that I truly would recommend to somebody who's a spiritual seeker. These books were more like spiritual Bibles in my life, and they came into my life when I needed certain pieces of information. And spiritual books can really facilitate our journey. It can really help us to broaden our awareness. As a spiritual seeker, I definitely realized that at the beginning of my journey, I was truly a truth seeker. I was very determined to find out who I really am spiritually. I would sometimes make notes about it, and there was a lot of ambition involved in really finding out who I am. Embarking on that journey meant that I needed a lot of assistance and a lot of help. And sometimes, a lot of times, I would find that assistance in books. I would find that type of knowledge that I was seeking in books. A lot of times it felt like the universe sort of sent messages through books to me, or sent some sort of information that I needed that would fall into my lap through reading a certain book or reading a piece of information in a book that would immediately help me and guide me through a spiritual shift in my life. So Eckhart Tolle's books, The Power of Now and New Earth, was the books that I came across first on my spiritual journeys. I remember, a couple years ago, somebody sent me an audio of The Power of Now. Listening to that book awakened something in me, energetically. And so The Power of Now was an amazing book. I would definitely recommend The Power of Now to anybody who's struggling with being more present, or struggling with really being at one, and accepting the present moment. I still do go back to that book every now and then because of how good that book is, and every time I go back into reading The Power of Now, it feels like I have discovered a new treasure. I've discovered some new information, so that's an amazing book. When it was 2020 and COVID was happening, I was going through my awakening, and a lot of people were also going through a spiritual awakening, coming across information about New Earth and coming across 5D, 3D split and all of that, and it felt very esoteric. It felt very overwhelming as well to learn about that. And so I actually like the way he talks about that in his book, New Earth. He talks about what is yet to come in humanity, what is yet for us to experience in terms of consciousness and evolution. The next one is Michael Singer's Surrender Experiment and The Untethered Soul. Those books has been also very helpful. I felt very much trapped, and I felt like there's no way out of this, dark night of the soul that I was going through at that time. And I stumbled upon The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. And it's really just a book about his life and how he surrendered and what happened when he surrendered and went through the process and how he got through that process. This book can offer a lot of insight to somebody who wants to learn more about spiritual surrender, how to energetically surrender. When there's no way out, what do? We go within and we try to free ourselves up within. My favorite story in the book was him talking about how he went to a prison and he was teaching about meditation and mindfulness, and one of the prisoners that were in prison was sentenced for life, and he got the teaching of surrender so deeply. He was so surrendered that he was just all light, because he couldn't have an escape outside, so he freed himself on the inside. And it is a book that I do visit every now and then, because it was that book that taught me a lot, and it came in handy in the time I needed it. So I love the book. Untethered Soul is also a very good book. It talks a lot about how to free yourself. It's like those two books kind of go hand in hand, and it speaks a lot about the spiritual journey. It speaks a lot about healing yourself. It speaks a lot about going on your journey to find your true self, your inner self. The next one is the Sanatana Dharma. The Sanatana Dharma is a book that I was actually given by my spiritual mentor when my journey just started. I remember my mentor shared this book with me, and he told me, as I was somebody who was just starting my spiritual journey, he told me that this is a very advanced book for a spiritual person, especially if they're just starting out. But he said that as I advance on my spiritual journey, the words and everything in that book will start to resonate more and more. and that was very true. For me, I grew up in a family that practiced Hinduism, so I would oftentimes hear a lot about the Bhagavad Gita, and I would hear stories about the Bhagavad Gita, but I didn't really read the Bhagavad Gita. But I would hear a lot of people preach about some of the stories in the Bhagavad Gita. When I went through my spiritual awakening, I was reading through the Sanatana Dharma, and then it became a little bit too complicated for me at the beginning of my journey. I remember I went into reading the Bhagavad Gita, and then the Bhagavad Gita was a little bit more like a little bit more surface level stuff. I wanted a little bit more intricate stuff, a little bit more in-depth stuff. So I remember I went into, I think I started reading the Vedas and the Upanishads, and they had like sonnets that were in a different language that I couldn't really understand. It just felt like a book that just had all of those, all of the main content into one book. And this is the Sanatana Dharma. I think the Sanatana Dharma is the perfect book for somebody who's asking the question, what is my life purpose? What is my Dharma? What does it mean? Am I on the right path? How do I get on the right path? How do questions about reincarnation, and it answers a lot of those types of questions. The next book is The Three Ways of Volunteers and New Earth. I really love this book, especially because when I was going through my spiritual awakening, I heard a lot about light workers, earth angels, star seeds, indigo children. That book will highly resonate with somebody who's going through a spiritual awakening right now. Somebody who, might wake up and realize that they're here for a specific assignment or a specific purpose. I remember the time I found her books was when I found her talks on YouTube, and I binge watched all of her YouTube videos on YouTube, and I was so intrigued by what she was saying. Obviously, it's very important to use discernment when it comes to spiritual information, and to really start to understand what resonates with you and what doesn't resonate. And I remember at that time just hearing her talk about all of this, it just felt like she was saying the truth. Like whatever she was saying was true, because I resonated. My soul was like, yes, this information that she's sharing, there is a lot of truth to it. And when I read her book, there it was quite the extension of all of her talks and everything, all of her work basically that she had over the past years. So I definitely say her books will highly resonate with anybody who's going through a spiritual awakening and starts to uncover the fact that they are light workers and they have an assignment, and to just learn more about that process. So yeah, these are some of my book recommendations to you if you are somebody who's a spiritual seeker. I hope that you found this video to be helpful and it has guided you in some way. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.